With the Horde established and a war chief chosen, the destruction of the draenei was on the horizon. But they weren't the only ones threatened. The other civilizations of the planet would soon learn and feel the destructive power of the Horde. These are the last events before the dominating inhabitants of Draenor would invade Azeroth via the Dark Portal. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome. My name is Quaylen, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. Basically, I'm taking something that's already condensed and condensing it a little bit more. Currently, we're on Volume 2. And if you want to start from the very beginning in Volume 1, I've made a video that contains all 10 episodes covering that content. You can watch it by clicking the tab up above or the link down in the description below. But if you're caught up, then let's continue our journey into the Tales of Azeroth. Prophet Velen and the Exarchs watched as the massive Horde army marched through Shadowmoon Valley towards the Temple of Karabor, prompting the draenei to bolster the temple's defenses with artificers, vindicators, and Rangari from Shattrath City. Fear struck the defenders when a volcano erupted with fell energy, providing undeniable proof of the Orcs' alliance with the Burning Legion. Despite being outnumbered, Velen stood on the front lines, imbuing his people with the light as they faced relentless bombardment from the fel-infused siege engines. The draenei fought with unprecedented ferocity, successfully pushing back the initial waves of howling orcs and nearly securing a miraculous victory. The tide turned when Gul'dan and the Shadow Council bypassed traditional Orcish laws to tap into the Dark Star, a decaying naaru named Kara that radiated potent void energies. By conducting a massive ritual, the warlocks channeled a pillar of shadow magic directly onto the draenei positions, instantly killing many and driving others to madness. Velen used his immense willpower to hold the void at bay long enough to lead a group of survivors in a daring escape through the harbor. The stronghold, once a glorious temple, was forever darkened by the influx of shadow and became known as the Black Temple. Following the victory, the Horde desecrated the holy relics and took many surviving draenei as prisoners. Gul'dan claimed the Black Temple as a base of operations for the Shadow Council, deceiving War Chief Blackhand by claiming it was merely a fortress for interrogations, while actually seeking distance from the War Chief's oversight. The Shadow Council subjected their captives to brutal torture to extract intelligence regarding the defenses of Shattrath City. They soon realized that Shattrath, with its massive garrison, would present the greatest challenge the Horde had ever faced in their campaign. Kil'jaeden reflected on the fall of Karabor with mixed emotions. While he craved the personal humiliation of Prophet Velen, he remained focused on the ultimate conquest of Shattrath City. Recognizing that the Horde's reliance on the Dark Star was a one-time tactical advantage and that previous fel infusions were reaching their limit, the Demon Lord proposed a more permanent solution. He instructed Gul'dan to have the Orcs drink the blood of a demon, a process that would grant them overwhelming, otherworldly power, while simultaneously shackling the entire race to the Burning Legion's will forever. Gul'dan, driven by the promise of godhood, readily agreed to orchestrate this mass corruption and convinced War Chief Blackhand to assemble the clans at a mountain near Hellfire Citadel under the guise of receiving a new form of fel magic. To provide the necessary catalyst for this transformation, Kil'jaeden opened a temporary gateway to the Black Temple to summon Mannoroth the Destructor, a massive pit lord and legendary legion general. Mannoroth radiated a level of malice that even the power-hungry Gul'dan found terrifying. Despite the warlock's efforts to keep the demon's presence a secret known only to the inner circle of the Shadow Council, the elder shaman Ner'zhul discovered the truth. Having been kept close by his former apprentices as a broken witness to his people's downfall, Ner'zhul finally found the resolve to act against the looming doom of his race. Ner'zhul recognized that he could not openly defy the Shadow Council, nor would most chieftains, blinded by their loyalty to Blackhand, listen to his warnings. He identified Chieftain Durotan of the Frostwolf clan as the only leader with the necessary moral compass and growing skepticism toward the war to potentially resist Gul'dan's influence. Seizing a moment of transition, Ner'zhul secretly planted an anonymous message within a batch of official Shadow Council orders destined for the Frostwolves. The letter contained a dire warning. If Durotan followed Gul'dan's commands at the upcoming gathering, he and his people would suffer a fate far worse than death. The Shadow Council remained entirely unaware of Ner'zhul's subversion as they finalized the preparations for the gathering. This secret act of rebellion by the former Great Shaman set the stage for a fracture within the Horde's unified front, just as the Legion prepared to claim its prize. While Gul'dan moved toward his goal of total control and demonic ascension, the anonymous missive reached the Frostwolf clan, planting the seed of doubt that would eventually challenge the Burning Legion's designs for Draenor. Atop a mountain near the Citadel, Gul'dan presented the gathered Orcish clans with a pool of Mannoroth's smoldering blood, deceitfully labeling it a gift from their fell patrons that would grant them the strength of gods. Grommash Hellscream, the chieftain of the Warsong clan, was the first to step forward and drink, undergoing a violent transformation as his muscles bulged and his eyes took on a hellish red glow. His bloodthirsty war cry ignited a frenzy among the other orcs, most of whom scrambled to consume the liquid and experienced the same intoxicating rush of power. Amidst the chaos, Chieftain Durotan and Orgrim Doomhammer stood as notable exceptions who refused the so-called gift. Having taken Ner'zhul's anonymous warning to heart, Durotan simply declined the drink, an act that deeply infuriated Gul'dan and raised his suspicions about the Frostwolf leader's knowledge of the Legion. Orgrim, horrified by the ecological decay caused by fell magic, used a clever political maneuver to avoid drinking. He claimed he was not worthy to share the same cup as War Chief Blackhand, a feigned act of servitude that satisfied both the War Chief and Gul'dan. The demonic blood instantly stripped the orcs of their fear and hesitation, replacing their remaining humanity with a singular, violent obsession with destroying the draenei. Even those who did not drink, such as Durotan and Orgrim, were not entirely spared from the corruption. The fell energy radiating from their transformed kin acted as an invisible aura that began to seep into their bodies, ensuring that over time, the skin of every orc in the vicinity would eventually turn the telltale shade of green. That same night, a jubilant Blackhand ordered the Horde to march en masse toward Shattrath City to begin their final assault. To bolster their courage, Gul'dan channeled fell energy into the very mountain they stood upon, causing the earth to split and erupt in gouts of fire. He proclaimed this destruction a divine omen of victory, mirroring the eruption at Karabor. This sacred peak, forever changed by the warlock's ritual, would eventually be remembered as the throne of Kil'jaeden. While the majority of the race fell into darkness, a small group of orcs remained uncorrupted due to their physical isolation. These were the victims of the Red Pox quarantined in Garadar, including Grommash Hellscream's son, Garrosh. Because they were removed from the immediate presence of the fell-infused horde, they did not undergo the green-skinned transformation. In time, this isolated group would be known as the Moghar, standing as the last remnants of the Orcish race untainted by the Burning Legion's influence. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this episode, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And if you ever feel like supporting the work that I do here, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or over on Patreon. I really do appreciate the support from everyone who has already done so. I'm not really in a position to offer much in return, but what I do offer is early access to the videos when I publish them. But now, having said that, let's get back to our story. Prophet Velen, haunted by the apocalyptic visions of a red sky and the total slaughter of his people, realized that Shattrath City was destined to fall. Understanding that a full evacuation would only lead to a relentless hunt by the Orcs, the Draenei leadership devised a grim strategy. A large portion of their military would stay behind to die in a final stand, tricking the Horde into believing the Draenei race had been completely extinguished. Although Velen initially insisted on staying to defend the city, the Exarchs eventually persuaded him that his survival was essential for the future of their species. While Velen led many civilians to the remote island temple of Tel'Redor in the Zangar Sea, Rangari scouts and Vindicators prepared for the inevitable siege. As the Horde approached, Kil'jaeden finally revealed his true form to the Orcs, no longer needing to hide now that their souls were bound to the Legion. He bestowed the warlocks with knowledge of terrifying new destructive spells to ensure the city's downfall. Simultaneously, Gul'dan and the Shadow Council introduced a horrific biological weapon, bombs filled with a volatile concoction of fell magic and the Red Pox. When launched against Shattrath's walls, these bombs released a corrosive, choking red mist that blinded the defenders and rotted their flesh, providing cover for the advancing Orcish army. The assault was brutal and supernatural, as warlocks used Kil'jaeden's teachings to rain fiery green meteors from the sky, which transformed into massive demons known as infernals upon impact. High-ranking defenders like Marad, Akama, and Nobundu fought with desperate courage against the overwhelming tide. The Vindicators' primary goal shifted to buying time for the remaining refugees to escape. While some, like Marad, managed to lead groups to safety, thousands of others, including women and children, were cut down as rivers of blood filled the city streets and courtyards. The Fall of Shattrath was the costliest victory the Horde had ever achieved, leaving a staggering number of Orcish dead alongside the slaughtered Draenei. Despite the devastation, the city was successfully reduced to a ruin of fellfire, fulfilling Velen's dark premonitions. The Horde celebrated the supposed extinction of their enemies, but the reality was a hollow victory that left the city a haunted shell of its former glory. Gul'dan, however, remained deeply uneasy because Velen had once again vanished. Fearing Kil'jaeden's wrath over the prophet's survival, the warlock dispatched his elite assassin, Garona, to hunt him down. Though Garona would spend years scouring the wilds of Draenor for any sign of the prophet, Velen and the survivors at Tel'Redor remained hidden, ensuring that the light of the Draenei was not entirely snuffed out by the Horde's conquest. Thousands of Draenei perished, yet their sacrifice enabled many civilians and military remnants, including Vindicators, priests, and Rangari, to retreat to the tomb city of Auchindoun. This site was the holiest location for their race, housing both their ancestors and a sacred naaru. Exarch Maladar took command of these forces, fortifying the ancient catacombs to prevent the Horde from desecrating their dead. Gul'dan, fearing the Draenei might weaponize the spirits of their ancestors against the Horde, dispatched the powerful warlock Tarangor and his Shadow Council agents to eliminate the holdouts. The ensuing battle within Auchindoun saw the Shadow Council met with fierce resistance as Maladar's forces, bolstered by the aid of ancestral spirits, slaughtered many of the warlocks. Realizing that victory was slipping away, Tarangor and his surviving allies used the dark knowledge provided by Kil'jaeden to pool their powers. Their goal was to summon a demonic entity powerful enough to crush the defenders, but in their reckless desperation, they tore a hole in reality and pulled something far more catastrophic into Draenor from a distant corner of the universe. The entity that materialized was Murmur, an otherworldly elemental of primordial sound. The sheer force of its arrival triggered a massive shockwave that ripped the earth asunder, instantly killing the majority of the draenei and shattering the architecture of the Tomb City. The destructive energies surged outward in waves, leveling the surrounding lush forests and leaving behind a scorched, lifeless landscape. Exarch Maladar and a small group of his followers managed to survive the blast only by using their magic to shield themselves, but they were left too weakened to continue the fight. Following the explosion, Tarangor and his warlocks easily overwhelmed the remaining defenders and bound them in chains. The Shadow Council then worked to contain Murmur deep within the ruins of Auchindoun, leaving behind a contingent of warlocks to ensure the volatile creature did not escape to threaten the Horde's interests. The vast ruined area surrounding the Tomb City was permanently transformed into a desolate graveyard known as the Bone Wastes, serving as a grim monument to the final destruction of the draenei's holiest refuge. The destruction of Auchindoun marked the definitive collapse of draenei culture on Draenor, leaving Prophet Velen and the remnants of his people as refugees on a dying world teeming with Legion agents. To protect the largest surviving enclave at Tel'Redor, Velen's artificers utilized a sophisticated network of arcanite crystals to magically shroud the temple's presence from the Horde. As survivors like Vindicator Marad trickled into the refuge, they brought with them the silent, permanent trauma of the horrors witnessed at Shattrath. Meanwhile, the environmental decay accelerated by fell magic began transforming the landscape. The Zangar Sea eventually receded to form the swampy mire of Zangramarsh, further isolating the hidden temple. A more tragic fate befell those like Akama and Nobundu, who were physically mutated by the Horde's red pox into shriveled beings known as the Krokul, or Broken. This affliction not only deformed their bodies but also severed their vital connection to the Holy Light, causing the healthy draenei at Tel'Redor to fear and eventually exile them despite the pleas for compassion from Velen and Marad. While many Broken, including the lost ones who descended into insanity, were forced to fend for themselves in the wilds, Velen spent the following years moving between various secret enclaves to provide aid and evade capture. The surviving draenei remained in a state of constant terror, never knowing when the Horde might discover their final hiding places. After the Fall of Shattrath, Warchief Blackhand shifted the Horde's focus toward the total conquest of Draenor's remaining civilizations. Chieftain Kilrog led the Bleeding Hollow clan on a difficult naval campaign to the isolated island of Farallon, the last unsullied bastion of the Primals. To overcome the dense forests, Orc warlocks drained the life force of the Botani and Genesaur to fuel massive wildfires, allowing Kilrog's army to slaughter the inhabitants and destroy the ancient ecosystem. Simultaneously, the Warsong and Twilight's Hammer clans laid siege to the Ogre capital of Highmaul. This battle was deeply personal for Cho'Gall, who sought vengeance for his past exile. He confronted the city's leader, Imperator Margok, in a duel of two-headed sorcerers. Despite Margok's prowess, Cho'Gall utilized his superior knowledge of Fel and Void magic to bind the Imperator to his own throne and burn him alive, effectively breaking the back of Ogre resistance. In other regions, Blackhand ordered the Frostwolf, Thunderlord, and Whiteclaw clans to exterminate the world's Groan, Ogren, Magnaron, and any remaining independent ogres. While the Frostwolves and Whiteclaws hesitated, finding the hunt dishonorable, Chieftain Fenris and the Thunderlord clan embraced the slaughter of their ancestral enemies. However, they met their match in Gorgrond, where a cunning and powerful Groan named Gruul successfully repelled multiple Thunderlord assaults from his mountain lair. forcing Fenris to eventually abandon the campaign due to staggering casualties. Amidst these purges, the half-breed Mok'Nathal were spared through the intervention of Rexxar, the son of the chieftain Leorox. Rexxar had joined the Horde seeking glory and resources for his people, defying his father's nature of isolation to prove the Mok'Nathal's worth to the war chief. Though Blackhand stayed his hand against the tribe, Rexxar would eventually come to realize that the Horde's true nature was far from the noble cause he had initially envisioned. By the end of these campaigns, the Horde had asserted dominance over nearly every corner of Draenor. Most of the planet's native giants and independent sorcerers had been systematically eliminated or forced into hiding. With the primals burned, the ogres subjugated, and the draenei scattered, the Orcs stood as the undisputed masters of a world that was rapidly dying under the weight of their fel-fueled conquest. The high Arakkoa of the Spires of Arak presented a formidable obstacle to the Horde due to their mastery of ancient Ep.6's technology. From their capital of Skyreach, they deployed a massive solar cannon that harnessed the power of the sun to incinerate approaching invaders. When Warchief Blackhand sent Kargath Bladefist and an army comprising the Shattered Hand, Burning Blade, and Dragonmaw clans, the initial Orcish assault was devastated by a searing beam of fire that destroyed dozens of soldiers instantly. Recognizing that a direct frontal assault was suicide, Kargath sought out the wingless outcast Arakkoa in Terakar Forest, who harbored a deep-seated hatred for their high-flying kin. Kargath struck a deceptive bargain. The outcasts would infiltrate Skyreach and sabotage the solar weapon, and in exchange, they would be allowed to claim the city for themselves once the Horde finished the slaughter. The outcasts successfully used their shadow powers to reach the summit and destroy the mechanism, triggering a massive explosion that permanently disabled the High Arakkoa's primary defense. True to his vicious nature, Kargath betrayed the outcasts as soon as the High Arakkoa were defeated. After casting the bodies of the Skyreach defenders from the spires, the battle-crazed Orcs turned their blades on their wingless allies. Kargath viewed the outcasts as a long-term threat and took personal pleasure in the betrayal. He ordered the systematic execution of nearly all Arakkoa, viewing the extinction of both factions as the only way to ensure the Horde's future security in the region. Kargath's cruelty extended to the survivors of the ruling class, whom he chose to transform rather than kill. Taking inspiration from the outcasts' own legends of Seathic Hollow, he forced High Arakkoa prisoners into the region's cursed shadow pools. The chieftain watched with delight as the shadow energy withered their bodies and severed their connection to the sun, forcibly turning them into the very wingless creatures they had always loathed. This act effectively annihilated the High Arakkoan culture and lineage in a single stroke of sadistic irony. Following the massacre, the remnants of the Arakkoa race were forced into hiding to avoid total extinction. A small group of newly transformed outcasts followed a former Skyreach guard named Grizzik, who led them to the haunted ruins of Auchindoun, a place the Orcs feared to enter. From the safety of the shadows in Terakar Forest, Grizzik and his followers nursed a bitter hatred for the Horde, biding their time and waiting for an opportunity to avenge the destruction of their civilization. After the victory at Shattrath, Kil'jaeden presented the corrupted, blood-addicted Horde to Sargeras, who recognized the Orcs as the perfect weapon to weaken Azeroth's defenses before a full Legion invasion. However, Sargeras ordered Kil'jaeden to sever all contact with Gul'dan. He intended to let the Orcs spiral into such a state of starvation and desperation that they would be willing to embark on any quest, including invading another world, simply to survive. This deliberate silence left Gul'dan in a state of secret panic, fearing he had been abandoned by his benefactor after delivering on his promise to exterminate the draenei. On Draenor, the consequences of the Horde's fel-fueled conquest became catastrophic as the planet's ecosystem collapsed. Tanaan jungle withered into a barren wasteland of red dust and bone, earning the name Hellfire Peninsula, while the Horde's capital was renamed Hellfire Citadel. Warchief Blackhand, witnessing the rapid depletion of food and water, demanded answers from Gul'dan. Unaware that the Demon Lord had abandoned them, Gul'dan deceived the Warchief, claiming that Kil'jaeden was simply preparing their next path, while secretly fearing that his influence and his life were at risk if his silence was discovered. As a year of famine took hold, the Orcs were forced into desperate measures, hunting Draenor's native fauna to extinction and even consuming their own mounts, such as the Dragon Maws Rylax and the Warsong's wolves. The combination of starvation and unspent bloodlust led the clans to turn on one another in violent internal skirmishes. Minor clans like the Lightning's Blade, Whiteclaw, and Redwalker suffered heavy casualties in these senseless conflicts, as the unity of the Horde began to fracture under the weight of its own predatory nature. The social order of the Horde disintegrated further as several clans succumbed to total madness, including the Warsongs, Bone Chewers, Laughing Skull, Shattered Hand, and Thunderlords. To prevent these volatile factions from destroying his core forces, Blackhand banished them from Hellfire Citadel, forcing them into the remote wastes of the peninsula to slaughter each other. Both Blackhand and Gul'dan realized that the Horde was on the verge of self-cannibalization, and without a new world to conquer, their race would soon be extinct. Sargeras watched from across the great dark beyond as the Orcs reached their absolute breaking point, exactly as he had planned. With the Horde now sufficiently desperate, he prepared to offer them salvation through a vessel he had corrupted on Azeroth. This pawn was the human mage Medivh, one of the most powerful sorcerers in history, who was destined to bridge the gap between the dying world of Draenor and the lush lands of Azeroth.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.